Good morning, scholars. Today we're going to continue our way through Pharr's Homeric Greek, a book for beginners, looking at Lesson 20, the formation of the active participles. So, what is a participle? A participle, from the Greek word metoke, participation, is a verbal adjective. Thus, it is in part a verb and in part an adjective. The participle is like a verb wherein it shows the distinctions of voice and tense, so it can be active, passive, or middle, and it can have various tenses, present, future, aorist, as we'll see. Its tenses mark action as simply occurring, that would be the aorist, continuing, that would be the present, and completed, that would be the perfect participle. Likewise, it can have the object. It can take an object, the participle can, in the same case, that is genitive, dative, or accusative of a finite verb. So just like a finite verb, I have a car can take an accusative object, a car. If I say, having a car makes my life more convenient, so too, that ing participle takes an accusative direct object as well. So, number C, it's modified by adverbs, not by adjectives. And then D, it may take on, and with that particle represents on with the indicative or on with the optative. And we'll talk about on much further down the road. So, again, the participle shows its adjectival nature by being inflected and by admitting the article before it, both of which characteristics give it the character of a noun. So it's inflected according to number, singular or plural, and according to our cases, nominative, genitive, accusative, etc., and also according to genders. So it's both inflected, like nouns, and can take the article before it, and thus it shows the character of a noun. And likewise, it follows the rules of agreement like other adjectives. What does that mean? That means a participle has to agree with the noun or pronoun that it modifies in number, in case, and in gender. However, unlike the adjective, it represents a quality in action. So, what type of action are we talking about? That depends on the tense of the participle. A present participle will represent coincident action, rarely antecedent or subsequent. A future participle will chiefly be voluntative, that is, it expresses the objective or purpose of the person who is being modified by it. An aorist participle will simply mark occurrence, often antecedent occurrence, and the perfect participle will mark completion, an action that's complete with a permanent result. So there's a long, beautiful section of Smyth's 1872 that's full of details and examples of these distinctions among the tenses that participles can have. So, down to the main purpose of this lecture is just to familiarize you with the forms of participles. So the forms of participles basically will be determined by the stems that stand between the verb stem and the ending, marking number, gender, and case. But between those two, you're going to have a certain stem that represents the participle. So, and those are three. You see here A, B, and C. We're only going to talk about A and C at the moment. A, the stem Neut occurs in all active tenses except the perfect, and in the first and second aorist passive. OT occurs, Omicron tau occurs in the perfect active, and we'll talk about that when we get to it. And C, mu, epsilon, nu, omicron occurs in the middle and in the passive, except the aorist, which has endings in NT. So, just to quickly say something about the middle participles. These are very straightforward because they end in menos, mene, menon, and are decline like os, a, on, like those adjectives. You know, agathos, agate, agathon. And thus are pretty easy to spot. So that in the parts of the Iliad that we've read so far, we've actually seen 3 middle/passive participial forms. And that's in line 2, we saw ulamenein, describing the wrath of Achilles. Ulamenein, and you see the mu, epsilon, nu there. And that's from olume. And then in line 13, we had lusomenos, describing the intention of the priest. And this is a future middle participle, because you can see the future stem, sigma, followed by the omicron, our stem for the future, and from luo. And then finally, hasdomenoi, which is a present participle from hasdomai, to reverence, which was to describe what the behavior of the Achaeans would be motivated by if they had chosen to honor the priest, as opposed to letting Agamemnon rough him up verbally. Okay, so I just want to give you a quick preview of the middle participles because they are so simple, and we've seen them and we'll see more before actually Pharr gets around to treating them. But our main attention here is going to be on the participles with the stem in nu tau, which is the active forms of the participle. So, these forms of the participles in the active voice, that is, except the perfect, and in the aorist passive participle have stems in nu tau. The masculine and neuter, as we will see, follow the third declension, whereas the feminine follows the first declension. Now, this 301A, there's a lot of information here that's going to be very useful to you down the line once you have all of this in order. But so right now it'll be a bit of a snowstorm on your brain, but nevertheless, this is a very important section to kind of like putting all the participles together. So he says at 301A, most stems in ont make the nominative singular masculine without sigma. You might remember that sigma is what's usually added to third declension nouns to make the nominative. Well, that's what you would expect here, but they make it here without the sigma and are hence like geron, the word for old man. But stems in ont, in the present and second aorist of mid verbs, dedus, dus, and all stems in ont, int, unt, they add sigma and lose the nt, the nu tau, and lengthen the preceding vowel, and so you end up in the nominative masculine singular in those cases with us, as, ace, and us. And in like manner, this is very important, the dative plural is formed from omicron nu tau adding sigma iota, which ends up being use, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But what's really key to take away here is that the what's really held in this note, the stem nu, the note, the stem of participles in omega nu, omicron nu tau omicron sigma, in ontos, the stem was originally had an omega, owned, like geron. So that will account for the fact that the nominative masculine singular will have omicron nu, as we'll see when we look at the full declension. But right now, I want to show what happens outside of the nominative masculine singular, where you're dealing with the omicron nu tau stem of the participles, the nu tau stem. And so you'll see it's in the present active, the future active, and the first and second active aorist, and also in the aorist passive. So in the present active, you simply have omicron nu tau. So I chose the dative singular as my example. So that would be lu ante, and that would of course be in both the masculine and the neuter of the dative singular. But then looking at the future active, you have to use the future stem, so that inserts sigma, but otherwise remains like the present. So you have sont. So lu sante is our masculine and neuter singular dative of the future active participle. Going now to the first aorist active participle, we have again the sigma of the tense stem, but we have that alpha that's characteristic of the first aorist. So we end up with lusante. But then with the second aorist, what characterizes it are two things. First off, you're going to have a second aorist verb stem. So in this case, we've taken the second aorist stem of lepo, to leave, which is lip, lambda, iota, pi. And when that's added, you have lipante for your dative masculine and neuter singular. But notice the difference in where the accent is between the present active and the second aorist active. You have lu ante versus lipante. That the fact that the accent has been pulled forward in the second aorist is something that characterizes the second aorist participles, as we'll see in a second. So finally, we have the aorist passive, first and second aorist passive participles, and they have epsilon before the nu tau of the participial stem. And so we've already seen kolothente, although in our text we actually had the nominative singular masculine kolothes, but to be consistent with me just producing these masculine and neuter singular datives, I used kolotenti. So you see, ante, 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 ente, those are the way that these get formed, and you see the slight difference of right before the participial stem, depending on what tense that you are dealing with. Now, I'm going into all these details of formation because the participles are very tricky. At least I had a lot of trouble with them when I started to read Greek, and I think that these sections in Smythe, following 301, where he displays all the participles in their varied groupings, I consulted that again and again and again, and had a very hard time recognizing participles until I came upon these general principles that enable you to just understand what's going on with them. So that's why I'm forefronting these principles, and I think they will be helpful in making your road to having a good grasp of the participles when you see them a little easier than mine was. So that's why I'm going into all this. Be patient. So, with the masculine and neuter of the participles, you see this certain phonetic rule that occurs and that affects the dative plural. And that's because the dative plural has the ending sigma iota with or without movable nu. but that sigma iota is your ending. And so the special thing occurs that's represented in Rule 100 or Section 100 in Smythe, that nu tau before sigma becomes nu sigma sigma, then nu sigma, and finally the nu is dropped and the preceding vowel is lengthened. So the bottom line there is that nu tau before sigma, the nu and the tau ultimately disappear. You're left with the sigma, but that vowel before that sigma gets lengthened by what's just called compensatory lengthening, section 37. Compensatory lengthening is a lengthening of a short vowel to make up for the omission of a consonant. In this case, the omission of two consonants. So you see, if you look at the dative plural of these masculine and neuter forms of luo in the present participle, you have luuse, and that has resulted from the compensatory lengthening that occurred of omicron to omicron upsilon, that is omicron to omicron upsilon, after the nu and the tau dropped out before the sigma. So that's how you account for that. It's not random. It's actually a very regular phonetic operation that occurs elsewhere. So you see the same type of phonetic rule occurring in the creation of the feminines, but there it occurs all the way through. So we have the same compensatory lengthening, and then we have the disappearance of the nu and the tau before sigma, so that the feminine gets declined luusa, luuses, luuse, luusan, luusai, luuson, luusais, luusas. So this is just like we decline, just like a first declension noun. Es, a, an, I, own, is, as. And again, that same compensatory lengthening with the disappearance of nu tau before sigma occurs, as I've said, in the dative plural of the masculine and the neuter. So you get luused. So looking at the feminines again, we see, and here's the rule that's actually in play, you see that the feminine singular is made by adding semivocalic iota, that's the iota with that little, thing underneath it, semivocalic iota and alpha to the stem. And those force the same action as sigma, and so you end up with luontia becoming lusa, and istantia becoming histasa, etc. And this occurs even in the feminine of the perfect, which we'll see down the road. But bottom line is, you end up with looking at the present participle of luo with luusa, luuses, luuse, luusan, and then the plurals as we would expect. And then looking at the feminines of on, the word for being, you have usa, uses, use, usan, and then the plurals as you would expect, I, own, is, as. And then our third example is what happens with the first aorist feminines. You have lu, sa, sa, lu, sa, ses, lu, sa, se, lu, sa, san, and then the plurals as you would expect. So that's what's going on with these participles in the larger scale, that the feminines are being declined like first declension nouns, whereas the masculine and the neuter are showing those third declension endings. Okay, So we see that if we look at the present participle, we see that in the nominative masculine singular, you have the ending omega nu, which is from that original stem of omega nu tau, which is seen in Gerhon. And so that's why you have this omega nu in the nominative singular masculine. But in the feminines, you have, as we talked about, the action that occurs with the compensatory lengthening. But then if you look at the neuter masculine, the neuter nominative and accusative, you have the omicron nu tau, where the tau has just dropped because tau cannot end a Greek word. So luon. And then outside of that, you just have the endings that you would expect, thinking in terms of the third declension for the masculine and neuter. Luontos, luonte, luonta, luontes, luonton, luuse, luontas. And the neuters, ontos, onte, and then for the plurals, onta, onton, use, onta. So you see that craziness with the compensatory lengthening that gives you the basic same forms in the datives, plurals, that you have in the feminines all the way through. So, but otherwise you're dealing with the ONT stem. Okay. Now, the future participle has exactly the same endings that the present did, but the only difference is the stem itself is loose, lambda, upsilon, sigma, just like the finite form, luso, luces, luce. You have sigma, which is the tense suffix before those endings on, ontos, onte, onta. Sorry, I apologize for that iota inserting itself with the accusative. That's supposed to be onta. And then in the plural, ontes, onton, use, ontas. And then etc. Just as you would expect this to be. Exactly the same endings that you found in the present, but the stem being just the future stem. And then if you look at the first aorist participle, you have again the sigma of the tense stem, but then you have the alpha that characterizes the first aorist finite verbs as well. Lusa, elusas, but the participle, of course, will not have the augment. So you have lusas, lusantos, lusante, lusanta, lusantes, lusanton, lusase, and there you have that compensatory lengthening going on with the disappearance of nu and tau before the sigma, iota, and then the accusative plural, lusantas. And so the feminines are likewise show the compensatory lengthening. So lusasa, lusases, lusase, lusasan, and the plurals as you would expect, I, on, is, as. And then the neuters, lusan, lusan, for the nominative and accusative. Identical they are, with the T just having been dropped, the tau having been dropped, and then antos, ante in the singular, and then the plural, lusanta, lusanton, lusase, lusanta. So these are a lot of forms, but if you understand these principles that are at work in their formation, by fooling around with them a bit on your pad with paper and pen, you'll, I believe, start to be able to recognize them. And now, finally, our second aorist participle. Here, you have the exact same endings that you had in both the present, and even the future, but your stem is different. You're going to have a second aorist stem, like here, lambda iota pi, the second aorist stem of leipo, but the accent is going to be placed differently in that the accent of your second aorist participle is in the masculine nominative singular on the omega, and then it stays on that omicron all the way through the other forms. So lipon, lipontos, liponte, liponta, and then in the feminine you get lepusa, lepuses, lepuse, lepusan, and then the neuter lepon, lepontos, leponte, lepon, and then the the plurals, masculine lepontes, leponton, lepuse, lepontas, feminine lepusai, lepuson, I forgot the accent there, lepusais, lepusas, and then the neuters leponta, leponton, lepuse, leponta. So again, notice, as always, that your nominative and accusatives of the neuters are identical. So in the singular, lepon, lepon, and in the plural, leponta, leponta. Okay, so let's look now at the participles that we saw in our readings of the Iliad so far, and you'll see oulamenein, erisante, kolotes, lusamenos, peron, ekon, ekontes, hasdomenoi, de thunonta, and itonta. And each of these, if you think about them closely, pause the video here and see if you can figure out what is the case and the number of each of these. The one that might throw you is erisante, because this is actually a dual, and we haven't paid much attention to the dual forms. But nevertheless, so pause and see if you can figure out, or look at your text, and we'll look at these closely in the next video, and see if you can figure out what is the number, the case, and tense of each of these participles. Okay, so that's it for this presentation. Have a good day, and good luck. These forms are hard to learn, but I think getting your mind around the principles that drive them will go a long way in helping you put it all together. So have a good day, and I'll see you again soon. Goodbye.